Obtaining Changli is the equivalent of being granted the hands of an elusive maiden. She is a character that thrives off of the finesse input of the player and some natural instinct. Some would say that your finger play is what elevates Changli's power, and if your touch isn't enough, then Changli just won't be satisfied. You see, Changli is more than just a Fusion Sword-wielding phoenix. She is also one of the most versatile sub-DPS in the game, as well as being a good carry on top of that. She fits into many teams seamlessly because of these facts. There are two big reasons why you want to use Changli. No, not those, focus up, come on now. You enjoy Quickswap gameplay using multiple characters at once, or 2. You've dedicated all of your mortal possessions to the Church of Changli where you will gaze upon the fiery statue of the supreme deity, Changli. My name is Void Enigma, and I'll be discussing everything Changli. I'll be going over how to play her best echoes, weapons, team options, as well as if her sequences are worth it. She is a character that gets better the more that you master her, and she is quite a force to behold once you actually master her. She is amazing for holograms and tough content thanks to her invincibility frames through Quickswap gameplay, and she can also dish out quick and easy damage across every game mode. She isn't for the faint of heart though, as you need to learn how to actually use her in order to play her properly. But of course, that applies to every character. Good thing you have the resident of the Enigmata who has been maining Changli for over 6 months. Let's get right into training your brain to have the fingering mastery over the buttons to play with Changli. So Changli is a character specializing in resonance skill damage, and she has a hefty resonance liberation as well. She has 4 stacks to her forte, which is gained by landing grounded true sight and aerial true sight. What might those be? Well, Changli gets a true sight charge in a few ways. 1, her resonance skill. 2, her 4th basic attack being both grounded and aerial. 3, her intro skill. And 4, her resonance liberation. The first 3 that I mentioned gains her 1 true sight charge, while her liberation will fill up her gauge entirely, granting her full stacks. When you reach max forte, you can perform a heavy attack to do a flame sacrifice, the signature move of her kit. This is a powerful nuke, and the payoff for your dedication to the true sight stacking. Truly a sight to behold for Changli. That's not all there is to it though. There are a ton of nuances with how Changli works with stack manipulation and gaining true sight. Before we talk about that though, let's discuss her liberation. Her liberation is another nuke. It can be used in midair, and that's important to remember, and I'll explain why later, but it also gives her a full forte bar and places her on the ground. Immediately following Changli's liberation, you always will be using a flame sacrifice or a heavy attack. Always. There is not a moment where you will want to do anything else to follow up with after these 2 unless the enemy is already dead. Also remember, Changli has an outro buff that buffs fusion damage by 20% and liberation damage by 25%. Now that we've gotten everything about her basic kit out the way, let's talk about Quickswap. So as you're playing Changli, you want to weave in her true sight attacks as you cycle through your characters. She has some neat ways to do this, so let's talk about them. When you have the charge through those methods that I mentioned before, and you swap off of Changli, you have turned your Changli into a heat-seeking missile when she's actually grounded and you swap back into her, or an aerial bomber if you swap back into her when she's in mid-air, granting you a stack. With that being said, let's talk about how to actually do that. You can use your resonance skill to gain a charge and then immediately swap off, and after a basic attack 4, you can gain a charge and then you can immediately swap off at the start of the animation. You essentially want to use her resonance skill as a means to gain her true sight charge when you're swapping off, doing things on your side characters, then swapping back to Changli to gain a stack. When you get 2 stacks, this is what I like to call the pre-nuke zone. At 2 stacks, this is a prime moment to exploit Changli's explosive power. When you use an outro on one of your supports or sub-DPS characters to swap into Changli, Changli will trigger her intro skill, and she'll also gain a charge for her true sight, which she'll immediately follow up with the aerial true sight. After you gain a charge to the aerial true sight, you want to use her resonance skill, which will make her immediately land onto the enemy. And as you've gained another charge from using her resonance skill, you can lunge straight into the enemy to gain another charge, allowing you to quickly gain 2 stacks. It's important to actually hold down the heavy attack when you're actually lunging forward towards the enemy, as this will allow her to immediately cast a resonance liberation. Remember, this is something you can use on every single part of her kit when she actually has 4 full stacks. You can do this during any of her plunge attacks, as well as when she uses her resonant skill. Just hold down the heavy attack and you'll perform a flame sacrifice without wasting a stack. Going back a few steps, if you use the intro skill and find that you actually don't have a resonant skill active, then you could just hold down the heavy attack to plunge down, and then you'll be able to follow up with basic attack 3 and 4 to achieve essentially the same thing. The same happens when you trigger a dodge counter. You never want to start at basic attack 1. But it does happen in combat, so it's generally fine. And that is essentially how you utilize quick swapping with Changli. You want to utilize her resonant skill, which she has 2 charges of on a 12-second cooldown, and then you do a combination of the following while weaving in other characters' attacks. Using her resonant skill and then swapping off, swapping back to Changli to gain a stack, using her basic attack to swap off, then swapping back to Changli, again gaining a stack. Of course, using your resonant skill is always preferred. Be sure to actually gain your stacks whenever you use it, as a big mistake with Changli is wasting your stacks. Kuro Games cursed us by making Chun-Li's blindfold only visible when she has full stacks, where she looks like a bona fide Fusion 2B. And they gave her the amazing liberation animation when you use it at full stacks of her blindfold being burnt off, only for it to be the worst option in combat. You just lose too much damage by using it since you're sacrificing a flame sacrifice. I can't believe I just said that. It's perfect for style points and you can use it to finish off holograms, but otherwise you're just wasting so much damage by ever using it. So let's talk about how not to waste stacks. Firstly, when you swap in with 3 stacks instead, you can do the same combo that we discussed before by using the aerial true sight following that with a resonant skill. You can actually just hold the charge by simply holding down the attack button as I mentioned before. She will land, trigger her flame sacrifice immediately, and then lunge forward to gain a stack. Another mistake is after you quick swap her first flame sacrifice and you accidentally trigger an outro skill into Chun-Li's intro skill. In order to easily not waste a stack, all you need to do is cast your liberation immediately while she's in air. This will make her land and it will still let you keep that charge that you gained by using her intro. It's one of the coolest tricks that I recently learned about her because you could then follow up and gain a stack immediately. So, how does this all come together though? Here is a slow motion example of the Chun-Li quick swap setup. Immediately start with your resonant skill and swap off. Next character does their actions, then your healer, and then you swap back to Chun-Li to gain a stack. And then immediately quick swap her resonant skill again. Following that, back to your other character to gain more concerto, and then back to Chun-Li to get her second stack, which you'll be sitting at for a while. From here, you want to stack up your outro on your other characters, and then eventually go into Chun-Li and use her intro resonant skill combo to get 4 stacks, use her flame sacrifice, quick swap that flame sacrifice onto your other character and do a little more jazz for them, then swap back to Chun-Li, trigger her liberation, and then another flame sacrifice. That is the gist of a quick swap gameplay with Chun-Li. Now, this changes slightly if you're using hyper carry Chun-Li, and also changes ever so slightly if you're using her as a buffer or sub-DPS. As a buffer, just be careful when her outro is ready. You want to generally use the full combo of the flame sacrifice, liberation into flame sacrifice before you even think about swapping off when her outro is ready, as you want to buff the incoming character. If you're using her as a hyper carry, you always want to have at least 2 stacks before your sub-DPS uses their outro into buffing Chun-Li. She's a character that you really need to play around with to know more of her nuances, but remember that all of these mechanics become more apparent when you're using her. I've pretty much gone over all of her tech, so use them together to get the best out of your Chun-Li, but keep in mind that you don't even need to exploit half these tactics to have a great time using her. You don't need to play her in a quick swap heavy team, as she can easily fit into a hyper carry team or a sub DPS team where she's buffing the incoming character, but we'll talk more about that in the team section. Another cool tech that you actually should be aware of is that when you actually gain a true sight charge, you can jump to actually do the aerial bomber phoenix instead of actually doing the grounded attack. This can be really fun to play around with, and just remember that jumping will trigger the aerial attack and clicking will trigger the grounded true sight slash. You are now a certified member of the Church of Chun-Li. In order to be initiated, you're going to have to subscribe to the channel and like the video. It's the best way to support the channel, and it'll help you play Chun-Li perfectly. That's a good deal, am I right? Alright. Chun-Li has two echo options, damage and sub-DPS. In my opinion, you always want to build her for damage unless she lacks a 5-star weapon. She wants to go with the Molten Rift set, and if you want to use her as a sub-DPS, then you can of course use the Moonlit set. She wants crit rate or crit damage for the 4-cost piece to better fit your ratio. For the 3-cost piece, she wants fusion damage, but attack percent works just fine. Focus on the better substats, and as for the 1-cost piece, of course we're going with attack percent. Her substat priority are going to be crit rate and crit damage, then attack percent and flat attack, then energy recharge, and finally resonance skill damage bonus and resonance liberation damage bonus. She wants at least 3 energy recharge rolls for a very comfy time where you will never have to worry about not having your liberation, although 2 energy rolls are necessary. She will be a bit sweaty with 2 energy recharge rolls, so 3 is just ideal. Her echo options are actually pretty straightforward. But let's talk about her weapons. Chun-Li is a character that thrives off of a 5-star weapon. With that being said, she generally has just 2 options. The first, of course, being her signature weapon, Blazing Brilliance. This gives a significant crit damage boost, along with boosting her resonance skill damage by a lot. It has a stacking mechanics, and for the most part you do want to exploit it, but I generally just ignore it, because when I'm using it, it kind of just lines up for it to work for me anyways. You are very much able to see the stacking mechanic at the bottom, so when you see that going up from 1 all the way up to 14, and then you have it, then you know that it's time to unleash your Chun-Li if you really care about it, but I just ignored it and I'm doing just fine. This weapon is, of course, her best in slot, and you want to get this weapon if you want to maximize your Chun-Li, but a very close contender is actually the Emerald of Genesis, the standard weapon. This is an amazing weapon for Chun-Li, and it's only about 10 to 15% behind her signature. If you can't afford the signature weapon, then get this weapon, it will serve you well. Next, we have the Red Spring, which is not the best on her. I mean, she can't really use the passive, and the crit rate is similar to that of Emerald of Genesis. I mean, if you have absolutely nothing else, then yeah, use it. It's a stat stick either way, but you're much better with the Emerald of Genesis, so get to pulling on that standard banner and grab another one if you need it. All other 4-star options are just really poor on her. Like, I would consider the kitty weapon since it gives a little bit of crit rate, but you can't even really use that because you quick swap so much. So you're kind of set to give her the standard 5-star sword or her signature. Hopefully we get some other 4-star weapons to use on her in the future, and I mean, I guess you can use some of the 4-star options, it's just that she's really not excelling with any of them. Alright, team options, and man does she have a lot of them. Firstly, Brant is coming out right alongside her, and I know a majority of you will be using them together, so I've got a team or 2 that you can use with them. If you want a Brant guide, then go ahead and click on the card right up there, or if this video hasn't been released yet, that Brant guide is coming in just a few days, so stay tuned. You got 2 options, Chun-Li main DPS or Chixia main DPS. Just to let you know what Brant can do, he's going to be able to buff Chun-Li's entire kit with a fusion damage buff and a resonance skill damage buff. But Brant is also a healer and a shielder, so that means you don't have to have another sustain on the team to actually use Brant and Chun-Li. One team is to use Sanhua into Brant to buff his basic attack damage, and then go into Chun-Li to buff her kit entirely, with the other team being a Chixia lead, where you'll start with Brant, into Chun-Li, into Chixia. And what makes this even better is that Chixia's S6 is going to be buffing the basic attack of the entire team for a substantial amount of time. So that will make Brant on every follow-up rotation that much better. I'll have a much more in-depth analysis with a Brant and Chun-Li quick swap guide, so stay tuned for that. I just need to actually play around with him a little more on the actual live server. Now, Brantless teams. She fits into many teams that enable Quickswap as a sub-DPS, and she also has many main DPS partners. Those being Carlotta, who has a kit that excels with Quickswap, Jinshi, whom she slightly buffs, Shen Liao, who she significantly buffs, along with Kalapoko. Speaking of the standard character she buffs, Encore of course comes to mind. She will appreciate Chun-Li, especially if your Sanhua is being used in another team. She works in tandem with sub-DPS characters like Yinlin and Roshia, and you can even use her along with Havoc Rover as a liberation damage buffer. As a main carry, she works very well with the likes of Zheji and Taochi for a massive resonance skill damage buff. Anywhere where you can quick swap, you can Chun-Li that thing. That's my saying after all. Other than that, don't hesitate to experiment with her. She has so many potential teams and she fits literally everywhere as a sub-DPS, so if there's content to be had, then you can use Changli. Characters like Yang Yang can do grouping for Changli to nuke, and in modes like Wuthering Waves, this works exceptionally well. She could even be paired with Sanhua, and despite Sanhua not giving her any buffs, the fact that she can outro at an insane speed makes her quite a good option for Changli. Lastly, we need to talk about Lumi. Lumi is a very complex character to play correctly with Changli, and I even gave up mastering it. It's really finicky to play right, and I am not much of a fan of it, but they do work in tandem when you actually play them correctly. Just be prepared to really learn how to play Lumi, because she is another beast when it comes to Quickswap. And I don't necessarily mean that in a good way, but she is quite fun when you actually do know how to play her. I did say she had a lot of teams, like I even beat Wuthering Waves with a dungeon Sanhua comp, simply by using Quickswap. We've gone over a lot, but what if you already have a Changli, but you want to make her even stronger? Well, of course, that's where the sequences come into play. Her S1 is a nice boost, giving you a 10% damage buff to her resonant skill and flame sacrifice, and offers some interruption resistance to those attacks as well. But generally, if you're playing Changli right, you won't ever get interrupted, since with Quickswap methods, she isn't really targetable. I rarely have been interrupted with Changli unless I voluntarily use her attacks when the boss is charging in. It is a decent damage buff, but it's not worth it on its own. Now her S2 is where the money is at. It increases her crit rate by 25% when she gains her enflammement. This is the stacking mechanic that she has, and it will always be active, so it's a permanent 25% crit rate buff. It's an insane buff, and this is a great stopping point for Changli lovers. Now, her S3 increases the damage of her liberation by a fair bit, but it's an okay boost since we're not actually increasing the multiplier, we're just adding on a little bit of damage, so it's not that much at the end of the day, but it's decent, I guess. Her S4 gives the entire team a hefty 20% attack buff when she triggers her intro skill. This should be active at all times after the first intro skill, so it's a very nice and welcome buff. Her S5 is huge. A 50% multiplier boost to her flame sacrifice, as well as increasing it by another 50%. This is actually insane, as you essentially get a buy two get one free. Plus, extra damage for her flame sacrifice. But what could get better than that? Well, of course, her S6, where she'll be ignoring 40% of the target's defense with every portion of her kit. Her resonant skill, her flame sacrifice, her liberation, that's just insane. The damage increase from her S6 is absolutely massive, and when we combine that with her S5, yeah, she has some really broken sequences higher up. With that being said, we can't all afford an S6 Changli. An amazing sequence for her is her S2, which you can actually just buy from the shop if you've been saving your coral. That's a 25% crit rate boost, which will actually allow you to run a crit damage main stat piece, which will skyrocket her damage. Anything beyond that is whale territory, and if you enjoy empowering Changli, then I won't stop you. Keep in mind though, characters like Shorekeeper have wave bands that are better suited for every character, and this will allow other teams to thrive more than investing into a single character. But either way, your damage is increasing tremendously, so do what best suits you. Changli is an amazingly versatile character who you can use across so many different game modes. She is the most difficult character in the game to play, but with some practice, she is amazing in the right hands. It's insane, along with being able to use two characters at once, it's just great to learn Quickswap. In game modes like the Hologram, she really shines because of her quick movements and aerial capabilities. Her Quickswap gameplay gives her so much invulnerability flames and moving around so much that the boss can't even keep up with you, making her insane against some of these difficult holograms as long as you're Quickswapping. She's not for everyone though, because the difficulty needed to master her is really up there, but nonetheless, whatever you put into her is what you'll get out of her. She is also somewhat future-proof in her role thanks to her outro buffing the liberation and fusion damage significantly, so when the next 5-star character comes out that actually is a fusion carry, then she'll always be an option for them. Changli has some fiery hands, so you best follow suit and set your keyboard on fire with amazing quick swaps. I mean, just look at Changli. Look at how smug her face is. Her clothes change when you actually progress through her forte. Like, you are not gonna skip this Resident Phoenix, are you? Go ahead and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and leave a like for the YouTube algorithm. It's the best way to support the channel so that I can continue to make amazing videos like this for you all. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, Enigma out.